Well, Dr. Tanda and Dr. Katie, we're so excited to have you guys back here for a second time. And I'm excited. We're going to be talking all about sugar and sugar cravings with you today. And while I was prepping for this interview, I actually read an interesting stat where it said that in the 1800s, the average person consumed 22 grams of sugar each day. And now 50% of Americans consume 220 grams of sugar a day or more, which is just wild. But I'm so curious to get your thoughts on what do you think is driving this massive uptick in our sugar consumption and what is it doing to our health?
I just want to start out like even defining like what is hunger, what is a craving, and what is your appetite.
I
So
love that.
hunger is actually driven by ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, and it's like the biological need for nutrients to live. That's hunger. Then appetite is like your interest or desire for food, and you notice like let's just like if your dog gets sick, what does it do? One of the first thing to go is its appetite. So that's usually a red flag for somebody who has a dog. It's like they stop eating, they immediately call the vet. Like, where's the appetite gone? So appetite is this like interest or desire for food. And then cravings is driven primarily by dopamine. So you have these two different pathways, right? So you have the hunger pathway that is hormonally driven by ghrelin and leptin. Leptin, it's Leptin. Leptin is a hormone, it's our fullness cue, and ghrelin is our hunger hormone. So hunger is driven by those two hormones. So ghrelin will make us feel hungry, leptin will make us feel full. And when those are when they're in regulation and we're eating a whole foods diet, so our body can read through fiber and minerals and nutrients and vitamins. And so when the body feels satiated, it stops us from eating. The thing with cravings is because it's driven by that dopamine pathway, and the dopamine pathway is, it's our instant gratification, it's addictions, it is the thing that will get you the frick off your couch to go do whatever it is that dopamine is telling you to do. It could be gambling, it could be porn, it could be food, it could be alcohol, it could be Netflix. And all of those companies that drive those industries understand the dopamine pathway. And so sugar drives that instant like ultra processed foods drives that dopamine pathway because they're void of nutrients and they light up. So if you Google image brain scan, sugar craving and cocaine, sugar and cocaine light up the same part of the brain. So when people say they're addicted to sugar, Katie and I are like, yeah, no shit, we know. It's like, it's a real thing. And what then people sadly sort of collapse on themselves is like, then they think they don't have enough willpower. They think they're a bad person. They think of, and it's really not. It becomes this whole hormonally driven dysregulation of desiring for that dopamine. Because once you get that dopamine hit, you want to go back over and over and over and over again. Anyway, just to start, like, so hunger is like a biological need for nutrients. Appetite is the desire for food, and cravings is its own little entity that, as what you just said in the beginning, is like we have, however many centuries ago, we were eating so much less sugar, and now 60% of adults are relying on most of their caloric intake coming from ultra processed food, which are devoid of nutrients and devoid of fiber and devoid of minerals and vitamins and healthy fats and things that will help that will turn up leptin and help shut that down. And then 70% of our children are relying on processed foods, which again is driving that dopamine pathway. And so what do you want to do? You just want to go get that hit over and over and over again because those French fries taste really good because they drive that pathway. Katie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's also too, like we saw an uptick in sugar consumption too, like in the 90s with the low fat, no fat craze, is that, fat kind of got a bad rap saying that, that's the driver of disease. And the sugar industry really sneakily kind of pushed that narrative and then was like, well, if we remove fat from food, it doesn't taste very good. So how do we actually sell this product without fat? We have to add sugar because sugar is, like Tanda said, it's like, it's not going to necessarily hit that satiety button that fat would. It's going to drive that dopamine, which is like our pleasure hormone, and then on top of it, we're already biologically hardwired to really enjoy food. That's how we in a hunter-gatherer community, that's what would be pushing you to actually go find food when you're hungry and you're cold and you're miserable and you don't actually want to go find food. It's because it's so rewarding to us. We actually have to get a biological reward. So that reward pathway is already biologically ingrained in us. And then these companies knew that. They've relied on our biology to sell their product. And so, fat got a bad rap. We removed that and then we replaced it with a lot of sugar. So I think we also saw a huge uptick in sugar consumption with that too. And now, I think we're slowly seeing the pendulum shift, that people are starting to not be so fat phobic. But still, it's like once we've opened that can of addiction really to sugar, it's hard to close the door on it and to turn that ship around.
Yeah, and I even see it, it's interesting that you mentioned the fat piece. I even see it with the calorie obsession, right? People are like, how many calories does this food have? And they're like, oh, it's really it's very low in calorie. It's totally fine. And I'm like, let me take a look. And then you look at the ingredients and you're like, what is this? I can't even pronounce half the stuff in here. And so I almost feel like that obsession with calories and fat, just as you mentioned, Katie, is what's driving people to just focus on those specific numbers and not care about what's actually in their food, which is sometimes all these hidden forms of sugar. Sugar has 75 or something different names. And they all just mean sugar. So when you guys are working with people and they kind of come in and they say, I just have a sweet tooth. That's me. I have a sweet tooth. It is what it is. What do you guys say to that person?
Well, they may really like sugar, but there's a couple of things at play there. It's like, what's our relationship to sugar? That can drive that. I mean, just like anything, it's like if we're soothing with sugar, that can drive that sugar craving too. Is like, you have a hard day at work. It's like, do you pour yourself a glass of wine, or do you reach for a bag of Oreos, or, do you sit and binge watch Netflix? It's like we use these different things, that dopamine pathway, to soothe ourselves. So, what's our relationship to food, and are we emotionally regulating with it? That's kind of one question that comes up, particularly with women. But then on top of it, it's blood sugar, right? It's like if you're riding a blood sugar roller coaster because you're, starting your day with a bowl of cereal and there's no protein or fat in that, you spike your blood sugar and then you'll crash pretty quickly. And then again, you'll have to reach for more food, particularly in the form of sugar or carbohydrates, because our brain runs on glucose. Glucose, it's not a bad thing because every cell in our body uses glucose for fuel, and our brain primarily uses glucose for fuel. So our brain wants that. It wants that kind of quick burst of energy. What I often use with my patients is the analogy of building a fire. Okay. So if you're going to build a fire and you're going to throw a piece of paper on that fire, that's going to be like your carbohydrates. It's going to burn really fast. It's going to burn really hot, and then it's going to extinguish. You're going to get quick, intense energy out of that. Then protein and fat is more like throwing a log on the fire. You're going to have more sustained energy throughout the day. But if you're riding that blood sugar roller coaster, you want that quick burst of energy because you're just feeling sluggish, then you get the energy and then it burns off, and then you get energy and then it burns off, and then you're just kind of on that path that won't set you up to win. So that's where, another thing that comes in is just looking at blood sugar regulation. But then on top of that, yet another kind of layer of this is then what's happening to your microbiome, right? Because when our microbiome shifts in favor of, bacteria that isn't necessarily setting us up to win, those guys really love sugar. The good guys really love fiber. They like the things that you're going to find in vegetables, but the, kind of quote unquote bad guys, they love sugar. And so they could be driving that craving too, is they're yelling at you being like, feed me, keep me alive, keep me alive. So what I say, kind of initially with people is intuitive eating is a really great tool. I think, as we kind of put ourselves back in the driver's seat of what we're craving, what we want to eat, how we want to nourish our body, but to go from kind of eating a standard American diet to having, kind of an intuitive relationship with food. It's not necessarily intuitive if you're addicted to sugar, if your blood sugar is rolling all over the place and your microbiome is off and you're getting these signals that aren't necessarily you. It's how do you get in tune with yourself? If you get in tune with yourself, you might be I really need sugar. I'm addicted. I love it. I want it. I want that hit. So what I like to do is take our patients through the process of actually being back in the driver's seat, which means that you have stable blood sugar, which means that we're addressing your microbiome, which means that we're addressing your relationship to food, which means we're addressing your mental health and how you're emotionally regulating and whether you're choosing food or, other vices to do that. So it's a pretty complex kind of multifaceted approach, but I think there's a lot of layers to look at when it comes to someone that just says that they have a sweet tooth, but most often it's not just because they like sweets.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I, even as someone who knows all this stuff, there'll be days where I'm not sleeping well and I'll look at my husband. I'm like, I just want chips. I want a cookie right now. And I'm like, and it's so interesting because you just have this desire that's like, I want it right now. And I don't like sweets. Like that is not typically me. And my husband's like, I don't think you slept well. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. So like being mindful of how certain, even lifestyle things can impact your blood sugar or your craving. So I'm curious, I know I mentioned at least for me sleep, but do you see any other lifestyle things that can kind of impact someone's wanting for sugar cravings or need to kind of shift away from like more healthier blood sugar, quote unquote balancing meals?
One bad night's sleep, and I'm going to define bad as less than 7 hours. There's been light stimulation before bed. There's maybe a nightlight on in your room. It's like 78 degrees in your room. It's like everything's not set up for ideal sleep. And Katie and I will go over what an ideal sleep hygiene looks like. One bad night's sleep, you will wake up the next morning with 33% less leptin. And if you remember, leptin is the thing that makes us feel full. So not only it also throws off insulin, it throws off your glucose, it also decreases leptin. So you're just eating, you're reaching one for carbohydrates and you can just keep on eating. So that is just one night. So sleep hygiene is, I call sleep the master dial of health. I think it's just such a beautiful way to help people heal because it's free. And when we do it and we really honor our sleep-wake cycle and do all the things to set our sleep up well, then you will set up your blood sugar to win for sure. The other thing that plays a huge role in hunger, blood sugar, and fullness cues is hydration, because a lot of people are dehydrated and they're also drinking just water. And so how clean is our water? It's not. So not only is our water, if you're drinking city water, Katie and I are pretty adamant about getting water filters into our patients' hands to really clean up the quality of water that's going into our body, but then also making sure that we're adding electrolytes, because magnesium, potassium, and sodium, water follows salt in the body. So we have to have sodium to actually absorb water. And 100% of us have insufficient amounts of potassium. And so that's oftentimes when sodium gets a bad rap, which it has. It's not necessarily sodium's fault. One is the quality of sodium, like what kind of salt are you eating? Katie and I are huge proponents of like good like Himalayan sea salt, where you're getting that quality salt. But when we have that imbalance of ratio between sodium and potassium, that's when people will start retaining water. Right. So that's where sodium gets the bad rap. But when people are doing electrolyte drinks, like we love Element, LMNT, and then Liquid IV is another one. So making sure that people are staying hydrated. So when people say I'm craving sugar, I'm hungry, are you really, or are you dehydrated? So that's another kind of what Katie was saying, just being a little bit more intuitive about eating and your cravings, is when you get that like itch, that hunger feeling, like one, if you're hungry, if this is actual hunger, or would you go eat a bowl of vegetables? And if they are like, oh yeah, that sounds good, then you're probably hungry. But if you're like, oh no, I really just want a cookie, like you're not hungry. That's a craving. So it's just these ways you can kind of check yourself, but making sure our patients are staying hydrated is key, and not just water. Like we are really huge proponents. I don't care if you're working out every day, you still need electrolytes. Like Katie, I do probably I do 1 to 2 of those elements a day. And, Katie and I we're sweating, we're going to the gym, we're doing saunas or whatever it is. So our bodies are definitely needing it. But, people say like, oh, I don't work out or I'm not sweating. I don't care. We need sodium, potassium, and magnesium to help with that, all of those with the cravings too. Magnesium, I think, when I was listening to Hyman the other day, it was like 25% of us or something are actually deficient in magnesium, but then something like 83% of us are insufficient with magnesium levels, all of which will have a huge role in how, one, you're feeling, but to your sugar cravings. And the sad part is the ultra processed foods actually deplete magnesium from our body. So we think we're eating and we're getting nutrients, you're actually draining. And again, ultra processed foods are, Kaya, what you were saying in the beginning is like, you can't pronounce the ingredients. That's an ultra processed food. If you can't make it in your kitchen, it's ultra processed. Yes, McDonald's French fries taste really good, but they're also doused in a lot of those nasty seed oils. There's lots of oxidative stress happening there. And then they're put into a container that is covered in PFAS. PFAS is a huge problem for, I mean, environmental toxicity. We're going down all sorts of roads, but you huge fan of French fries if you can make them in your own kitchen. You know what I mean? So yeah, I would say hydration and sleep are two big ones. Katie, would you say anything?
Yeah. Also stress, that's kind of the big one. That's been super fun. Like we've been doing a lot of continuous glucose monitors with our patients, and the stress piece of it honestly has been surprising. Like how blood sugar is impacted by stress. I mean, physiologically it makes sense, right? If you're standing in front of a tiger and you need to have a lot of, available energy to be able to fuel your muscles to either fight or run away, then how does the body do that, right? Even in the absence of food, if you're fasted and you come up against that tiger, you're still going to need glucose to be able to feed your muscle cells so that you can sustainably survive. So the way that we do that, because glucose is so important in our body, again, it's not like we're not hating on glucose. It's just how well are we regulating and how well are we metabolizing that? When we're stressed out, because our body is so dependent on glucose, we have a backup. Our liver can actually take stored glycogen, and through a process called gluconeogenesis, so gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, genesis meaning to create, we can actually create glucose in the absence of food. So when you're fasted and your liver, your stress response kind of turns on, you shift into that sympathetic nervous system. Your body says, I've got this. It's like, even though we're hungry and we're fasted, I can still create glucose so that our muscle cells will be able to fight this tiger, to run away. So that's all well and good when you actually want to fight and run. But what's happening when you're sitting at your desk, right? And your blood sugar just starts to raise, but you're not using your muscles the way that you would historically. So and I don't know, Tanda, if you care if I share this story, but so we had done glucose monitors on ourselves, and, food looked really good. Like there wasn't it was, pretty steady Eddie. And Tanda was, with her dogs and looks out the window, and they had gotten out of the fence. So dogs are missing, they've run away. And she scans her arm in the process of, like looking for the dogs, being super scared. What's going to happen? Are they going to get hit by a car? Did they run away? Are they going to get shot? Like, all of the catastrophizing that's going on in her brain. And her blood sugar, after not eating, she was fasted, was like in the 200s. So that's the impact of stress on our blood sugar. So even if you're eating like a perfectly clean diet and you're hydrated and you've slept well, managing your stress. And then what I have found really cool is like, it's a neat way to define stress, because all of us are, we're moving through our day, but we wouldn't necessarily, unless you're like kind of dealing with a catastrophe or, kind of like those big life events, a lot of us don't necessarily think we're all that stressed out, or we're managing it okay. But when you put the glucose monitor on, your biology isn't lying. So that has been kind of the funnest part about the glucose monitoring for, our patients' sake. Because like, yes, I want to see what's happening with food. Yes, I want to see what's happening with sleep. But stress, man, that's a big one that a lot of us aren't talking about. And that's been kind of neat to see.
I'm just looking back on the past 2 years since I had my first child. And I'm thinking about those three things. I was definitely dehydrated when I was breastfeeding. I was definitely not sleeping well. And, it's a big life change. So there's stress. And my sugar cravings, I got rid of my sugar cravings, actually. Like I was really good and I had a sweet tooth growing up. And the past 2 years, they've just come back. Like, I really have to work, and I have my tools of like how to overcome all of that. But, they've really come back full force. And I feel like as a new mom, I give myself grace. This is just like a specific period in my life where this is happening. But I can't help but think of all the new moms who are probably out there feeling the same thing. Like how do I prevent all of this? And I like just want to eat sugar to survive. And, what do I do?
Well, the cool thing about, some of the studies are actually showing that some of the detrimental effects of lack of sleep in new parents, particularly moms, that you're like biologically protected from that. So it's not necessarily the same of just like, having an all-nighter or, just not prioritizing your sleep, because there's a whole new like hormonal shift when you're caring for a newborn, and like all of that oxytocin and the connection, and like the way that I interpret it is like you're protected by love, it's like in that process. And sometimes it is that, Kay. It's like, yes, you're underslept, yes, you're, probably a stressed out mom. Yes, you're dehydrated from breastfeeding, but your body actually might just be craving more carbohydrates because you're trying to sustain another life, and because you're trying to heal from, what your body went through, that massive transition in pregnancy, and then giving birth, and then in postpartum. So there can be that too. It's just like giving yourself grace is like, maybe it doesn't necessarily look like, in the form of a cookie. I hope occasionally it does, because I don't want to live in a world where I can't have cookies. But maybe it's just actually like your carbohydrate need has increased so that your body can heal.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And just honoring those different stages of our lives. I want to take a step back and talk about why overconsumption of sugar is a problem. We got into the blood sugar piece, we got into the glucose piece, but what do we see with long-term overconsumption of sugar in terms of health outcomes?
There was a cardiologist, and I can't remember his name, and he described eating sugar. And when we say eating sugar, I'm referring to cakes, cookies, crackers, pastas, processed food, candies, that table sugar. And he described it as like sandpaper to the inside of the body. And I was like, ouch. I get that. Like, what it does is just that. It creates chronic inflammation. And I don't care which way you shake it, chronic inflammation. And by creating chronic inflammation, it is spiking glucose, it is spiking insulin, it is creating oxidative stress. It's like sandpaper to the inside of our body. It's chronic injury. And which then leads to the immune system having to then report to that chronic injury. That is called the inflammatory response. So then the immune system's constantly reporting to that inflammation, that injury. And then after years and years and years, you have chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation, I don't care which way you shake it, will end up with a diagnosis. And it could be cancer, it could be diabetes, it could be heart disease, it could be Alzheimer's, it could be, you name it. The other thing is, I think the study was done with 2 petri dishes, and there were normal cells in one and cancer cells in the other. And theys of the science world squirted glucose into both petri dishes. The cancer cells ate it 4 times faster than the other cells. It's a problem. It's a huge problem. And because it's not just the sugar alone, it's the cascading events how it wreaks havoc on the body in all of those ways that I just said. The other thing is glucose is like, it's a sticky molecule. And so this is where you get trouble with type 2 diabetics losing limbs and going blind and having chronic kidney issues, because when you get all the way down to the toes and the fingers, the capillaries are teeny tiny, and glucose, when it's dysregulated, so if you have really high levels of sugar in the blood, think about it as sugar in the blood. And then when it gets down to these teeny tiny little areas in the kidneys, and teeny tiny areas in the eyes, and teeny tiny areas in the feet and the hands, it clogs it. So then you don't get circulation there. So then the circulation gets cut off, and then you get gangrenous, and you get kidney failure, and you go blind. So it is, there's really, I wish there was something nice to say about sugar other than the fact that it does taste good. And like Katie, I do want a life that I can eat cookies, but like, it doesn't do a whole lot of good for the body.
The other thing is just with chronic sugar consumption is insulin resistance. So what happens is, you eat a cookie and your body then breaks that down into glucose, right? We take, kind of table sugar, we break it down into glucose, which is a molecule that our body can understand. Now, if you're eating a cookie occasionally, if you're eating carbohydrates in the form of like, sweet potatoes and beets and winter squashes and things like that, that's not a problem. That's fuel for your cell. So when we think about, kind of healthy glucose metabolism, we're thinking the name of the game is how quickly can we get glucose out of the blood and into the cell? How can we quickly use it for fuel? And the way that we do that is we break down, that cookie or that sweet potato or that, French fry, whatever it may be, into glucose, and then it goes into the bloodstream. That signals our pancreas to release insulin. And insulin is an anabolic, so it's like a building hormone. And then insulin and glucose are like BFFs. Insulin then enters into the bloodstream, and it is the one that knocks on the door of the cell and says, "Hey, cell, I have glucose. Would you like any?" Now, a healthy cell opens up that door to the knock that insulin had. So glucose can't go up and knock on the door of the cell. The cell won't open the door. We need insulin to be able to shuttle glucose into the cell. So a healthy cell that is sensitive to that knock on the door from insulin will open the door and say, yeah, of course, I'd love some glucose, send it on in. What happens over time when we're eating a diet that's very high in glucose, or we're, kind of, again, like riding that blood sugar roller coaster, is that, by the fourth or fifth time that insulin's knocking on the door for the day, the cell's like, no, I'm good, actually, like I don't really need any. And so over time, our cells become what's called insulin resistant. It's not going to open the door to the knock that insulin is knocking on the door. So then what happens is like this kind of double-edged sword is now we've got glucose hanging out in the blood for longer periods of time because it's not able to shuttle into the cell. And that's where it causes damage. That's where it acts like sandpaper on the vessel. In the cell, it doesn't act like that. But in the blood, in the vasculature, it does. So then on top of it is we have chronically high levels of blood glucose. So our pancreas is chronically getting the signal that we've got a lot of glucose to deal with. So the pancreas is shuttling out more and more insulin. So in the beginning stages of insulin resistance, you'll actually find a lot of insulin in the blood. And that's where people can really get into trouble, because you're eating the glucose, it goes really high, but then you'll crash really fast because our body is compensating for the fact that the cell isn't as sensitive to the knock on the door. So maybe it won't open its door to one insulin molecule, but maybe it will if there's 10 knocking on the door. So our body actually gets smart and is like, I know what to do. But then we have the issue of not only is there glucose hanging out in the blood for longer periods of time, but now we've got insulin hanging out in the blood for longer periods of time. And that has a whole cascade of events of fat storage, because then what do we do with this glucose? And then on top of it, now we have cells that aren't really readily opening their door to glucose. So that can show up as what they're calling now dementia and Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes of the brain, is because it's insulin resistance of the brain. And again, the brain is the number one consumer of glucose in the body. So if your brain is hungry, then it's gonna signal, it's gonna also signal you to want more sugar in your diet, because the brain is perceiving itself as starving. Even though there's plenty of glucose in the blood, it just can't access it. And so then we have all of the issues of just what happens to a starving brain, and then what happens to cells that can no longer get glucose. And then over time that can look like, type 2 diabetes, where, we've heard of, people who are insulin dependent, meaning that they have to take a shot of insulin because basically what's happened is that their pancreas is puttered out. It's like, I have been pumping out insulin for so many decades, I just can't keep up with the demand anymore. So what's the point? And so then we actually have to become dependent on insulin from an outside source. So that's, long-term effects of dysregulated blood sugar is every cell in the body is impacted. Every organ system is impacted. It's just not a good path.
I really appreciated your description, Katie. I was going with you. I love the knock on the door. I was like, oh my God, I understand now. I know Kaya knows it all, but I'm still learning everything myself here. So that was amazing. And I'm so curious because one thing I noticed, depending on where I am in my cycle, because I did wear a glucose monitor back in the day, I noticed that I would be more or less insulin resistant at different parts of my cycle. So is that accurate? And if so, what's going on with our hormones if we're still in our reproductive years? Because I'm curious, if I'm going to eat that cookie, should I wait till after my period, or is it worse before? So I'm just curious how that all shows up.
No, it's a good question. And it is a natural thing. Our bodies fluctuate into, over the course of so if you're having kind of a normal 28-ish day cycle, it depends on kind of who's running the show. The first part of your cycle, so if we count day 1 is the first day of bleeding to ovulation, so roughly around day 14, estrogen is really running that show. And then in the latter half of your cycle, progesterone is running that show. The first half of our cycle, our metabolism slows down. So we have a slower metabolism, but we're more insulin sensitive. So estrogen is a more insulin sensitive hormone. So you're better able and more resilient to metabolize that glucose efficiently. Progesterone metabolism speeds up. So you're actually hungrier, but you're more insulin resistant. So in that time frame of your cycle, increasing protein, increasing fat, increasing calories by a little bit is going to be necessary. But the reason that we feel kind of hungry and we're craving those carbohydrates is mainly because we're probably undernourished with protein. So increasing protein, because you're going to have a higher caloric demand, but your cells will naturally be more insulin resistant during that period. So you're not going to be able to respond to that cookie or that, that piece of pie or whatever it may be as well in that second half of your cycle as you would in the first half of your cycle. But you might struggle with cravings a little bit more because your metabolism has sped up, so you're hungry. So that's when it's just really important to get those extra calories through, more like throwing the log on the fire versus the paper.
I want to get into practical tips for people who are listening at home and they're like, it's just uncontrollable. I have a sugar addiction. I've identified that. What are some steps that they can start to take today to overcome that if they have, that motivation to want to?
One of the first things, what Katie said too, is like really diving into their actual relationship with food, right? And being more mindful, like when that sugar craving does come in, what time is it coming in? It's usually midday or after dinners or after meals. What kind of nutrients were they getting in that meal, right? Is their body still thinking that it's hungry because they were eating, a chicken breast and steamed broccoli, which is the worst meal in the whole wide world. I don't know why people think that's healthy. It's like, sounds so terrible. It's like, who wants to eat a hockey puck with some bland broccoli? So like making sure that their meals are like fun, like full of really healthy fats and good protein and flavors and spices and
Which I feel like
herbs.
is more important for women than men. Men can eat the hockey puck and the whatever, and they're like, I'm good. But women, we need like the fun.
Yes, food is such a way to experience pleasure, and how we deny ourselves with pleasure, and especially with being female. And so that's where it's when somebody says, oh, I'm craving sugar after a meal, and we're like, well, what'd you eat for dinner? Well, it was the steamed broccoli and the hockey puck, and we're like, okay. Let's start with actually having fun with food. Like that just jazzes me up so much. I just think food is such a beautiful way to communicate and share and celebrate love and life and flavor and experience and pleasure. And so that's one, is just kind of starting where people are at with their relationship with food. Do they like eating? Do they not like eating? Do they like cooking? Do they not like cooking? So some education and hand holding around that. Then what Katie spoke into is protein. Protein, I can't tell you the number of patients that we have helped increase their protein and their cravings go away. And the reason is because their blood sugar actually gets stable. And so their brain is like, oh, I have fuel all day long, Susie Q, because you're actually eating protein, because it's like throwing a log on a fire. So the brain isn't like, no, Susie Q, we need more carbs, more carbs, more carbs, more carbs, more carbs, more carbs. I'm starving because, she ate, oatmeal for breakfast, and then no, drank coffee first, then ate oatmeal, then ate, ramen noodles for lunch, then had a Diet Coke, then had pizza for dinner. And the brain is just like, that's all I know to crave, to tell you to do. Plus she's eating, very dopamine addictive foods. And so making sure that we're coaching people around the allotted amount of protein. And the rule of thumb around protein is 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's on the kind of the lower end. And so in real words, that is a 130-pound human should eat about 100 grams of protein a day, just under. And so if you can average as a woman around 30 grams of protein, and that, it's actually pretty challenging for people. And Katie's really taken this on, actually like tracking it, and she's crushing it, but it's taken effort, right? For her to like really put into like mixing protein powder in with yogurt and making sure that how many eggs she's eating. And, it takes a lot, but when people's blood sugar gets regulated, most of the cravings actually disappear because the brain is fed properly. The other thing to look at is nutrient deficiency, specifically magnesium. So making sure that people are getting minerals is huge. All of our patients are on some sort of mineral supplement at some point in treatment. Magnesium and omega-3, I think, are two of the biggest ones. Plus, because fat is another thing that tells the brain that it's full. It will trigger that leptin to say, stop eating. That's why when we went through the fat-free craze and we pulled all the fat out of things, we just kept eating. And we all got, I don't like using this word, but we all got heavier because it was all sugar. And because our brains was like, I'm still starving because there's no fat. So making sure that the fat and protein balance is there. And then, and helping people with, so tyrosine, which is found in food, is the precursor to dopamine. So how can we set people's diet up so that they're eating these tyrosine high foods high in tyrosine that will help with that dopamine pathway in a healthier, regulated way, not coming from that like need and craving. So dairy, like high protein foods, I know this is going to come as a shock. Like we are so pro protein. So dairy, soy, which fermented soy I'm a fan of, nuts, cherries, those are all high tyrosine foods. So like starting your day with, cottage cheese and some cherries and some nuts is like, that will set up your blood sugar up to win, and two, feed that dopamine pathway in a more healthily regulated way.
I love that. And I definitely have seen the impacts of that in my own life. And I never was eating frequent meals or eating the right breakfast, and my brain just completely turns on and I'm way more functioning of a human being. So I love sharing info like this and protein and fat. And I still think some people are scared when you say fats, like you need more fats in your diet. So I actually am thinking about, how do I get more healthy fat? So can you guys give me some examples of what that might look like for you?
So not all fat is created equal, but healthy fats I would consider like organic. And kind of caveat here, fat is, I think, an important place to kind of, spend money, invest in quality fats, particularly animal fats, just because of the way that the animal is treated and what's actually stored in that fat molecule versus a healthy animal will then kind of dictate how that fat is impacting your body. So that's just kind of like a side note. It's just like, I do think like fat and, animal protein is a place to kind of put a little bit more of, invest in that a little bit more. But healthy fats, I would say like organic grass-fed butter or ghee, extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, dairy products, particularly raw dairy, if you can tolerate it. What else am I missing? Anything like tallow, duck fat, lard, if it's from like pasture raised pigs. All of those are going to give your body really healthy fats. And saturated fat, again, has kind of gotten a bad rap. And yet, that is what makes us feel satiated. And it's not again, like not all fat is created equal. And what's the health of the animal that you're eating that fat from? But I just use it liberally. It's like when I cook or if I make vegetables, I'm adding, a decent chunk of butter to it. I'm adding tallow to it. I'm adding, and I'm getting variety in that. I'm coating things in olive oil. I'm eating, predominantly a whole foods diet. You're making an olive oil based dressing. That's one form of fat. You're eating animal protein that has fat in it. Maybe you're topping, your vegetables with a good chunk of butter. Really kind of any meal that I'm eating, I'm getting more fat. And Tanda, do you have recommendations for that?
I think that's one of the things that surprises most people when they do cook and eat with Katie and I, is the amount of fat that we add. It's like we are very liberal with it. And the amount of butter that I consume, I think would put most people off. But it's one, I think it's a superfood. I mean, it's full of again, coming from healthy animals. Cows that were actually outside eating grass that were then milked and making butter. Butter's ingredients should be cream or cream and salt. That's it. And in that butter is butyric acid, which is an anti-inflammatory compound. It's all the fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, are all contained in there. And it's like, it is a superfood. So I think also just helping people debunk and the myth that we have had for so many years around fat. And it's like a swear word. I mean, you watch women, especially when you use the word fat, they cringe. And it's taken a lot for Katie and I to really coach and teach our patients that it's okay. It's actually neat. You need it badly.
There's a really good cookbook if you want to kind of do a deeper dive into just like the biochemistry of fat and why we got so skewed from that. It's called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. And the beginning of it is just like, it's kind of like a textbook. She goes into all of the macro and micronutrients, but she gives the whole kind of history of that fat phobia, how that started, and then actually like how fat is used in the body, such that fat isn't the problem. Really, the sugar and dysregulated blood sugar is going to be causing, you to store more fat. It's going to be harder on your vessels. It's going to create more inflammation. You're going to create more cholesterol in response to that. The fat itself is not the thing actually doing that. If you have regulated blood sugar and you're eating, a diet that is, has ample amounts of healthy fats in it, I mean, every cell membrane in your body is made up of fat. Your brain is mostly fat. Your hormones are made from fat. Like, fat is a massively important molecule in our body. Like, we have this backup system that if we don't have glucose, we can use fat to feed our brain, because fat's actually probably more important than carbohydrates are. So I think we got really off track in the, kind of mid 80s, 90s, and we're slowly trying to course correct. But that's a good resource for people if they're looking to just learn a little bit more about it in a digestible way.
I love that book. And I also love what you mentioned too, because if anybody's listening and they're still eating a ton of processed carbohydrates, please don't just add butter to your diet and think everything is going to be okay. It's probably going to make things a little freaky. You might see some scary numbers that you might not like. So I want to talk about, so much of what we're discussing is metabolic health. So if anybody's listening to this and they're like, okay, I suspect metabolic dysregulation is driving my sugar cravings, I want to work with my doctor, I want to figure out what's going on, what are some recommendations that you have for them? What labs should they be looking into?
Yeah. And just to throw some stats out there, they're pretty staggering. 93.2% of us are metabolically unwell. And what that means is kind of a combination of a lot of things. One is what Katie was saying earlier, was that like all those like spikes and dips in your blood sugar should look like, if you're doing like a continuous glucose monitor, it should look like rolling hills, not peaks and valleys. That is very stressful for the body. And then many of us are like, oh, I want a fast metabolism. No, you want a flexible metabolism. And that's what Katie was just saying, is you want to be able to use glucose as fuel because we're eating, but if we are in a fasted state, to be able to switch into ketosis. Lots of people have heard of the keto diet. But that's a flexible metabolism, that you can go into a fasted state and still have energy. Your body is actually still high functioning because you are in ketosis. So your body can switch back and forth. I imagine it like two different pantries in your kitchen. Like one is the glucose pantry and one's the fat pantry. And the body can just switch back and forth depending on where you're at. And many of us are stuck in the glucose pantry, and the body has a lock on the fat pantry. And that's where people don't have a flexible metabolism. They have to eat every 2 hours. They get hangry. They have sugar cravings. They have a quote unquote sweet tooth. They wake up in the middle of the night with heart palpitations, and they're not in menopause, right? That is the body going through major blood sugar dysregulation, mostly based on stress and diet. But in terms of labs, this is, I think, where Western medicine and just sort of more of this conventional approach to blood sugar monitoring fails miserably, because we are looking to what you typically get on your regular labs is you get you get glucose. Sometimes it's fasting. Like they make it, they say like do fasting. Sometimes they don't. So it's not even really that clear for people. And many times I'll ask my patient, well, were you fasting? They're like, I don't remember. I'm like, oh man. You'll get glucose of some sort. Then you'll get your cholesterol, which is, again, pretty generic. It's like LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, which really doesn't tell us a whole lot. And then maybe they'll do hemoglobin A1C, but that's it. That's the monitoring of blood sugar. And then they say, oh, well, if you're over 100, if your glucose is over 100, fasting glucose is over 100, you've got a problem. Well, I'm going to tell you, if your fasting glucose is over 100, you've had a problem for about a decade. That is your horse is so far out of the dang barn that there is a problem. So that's, I think we're doing people a huge disservice, and sort of that sort of regular. I'm not knocking conventional medicine. It's just sad because we have these other markers that I'll go through that can really help people identify way sooner that they have a metabolic issue and blood sugar dysregulation issue. One of them is get your fasting insulin tested. It is a cheap test. The range, I was laughing at this. Okay, you'll probably laugh at this too. The range for fasting insulin is 5 to 15, which is insanity. Nobody should be.
I've seen it as high as 24 on certain labs, depending on.
Wow. You want your fasting insulin to be under 5. under 5, and yet they have the range at 5 to 24. Like, I think something over, like if you're over 10, you're pre-diabetic. We're looking like pre-diabetic. You want your fasting insulin under 5. It's a cheap test. It will tell you a ton about where you're at. Your fasting blood sugar, maybe, I mean, for some people, it should be in the 70s. And I almost never see that on a lab. I don't think I've ever seen it that low. But yet that might be what we actually need to be normal. It's like maybe 75 to 95. So looking at your fasting blood sugar, then looking at your hemoglobin A1C, and hemoglobin A1C is like a, sort of simply said, it's the average of what your blood sugar has been doing for the past 3 months. Now, this can be also misleading because I'm going to take you all the way back to like stats or whatever class we all took we hated. But when you have a high and a low and a high and a low and a high and a low, and then you take the average, what does it look like? It looks normal. So hemoglobin A1C can actually throw it off. So, but if your hemoglobin A1C is high, which anything over 5.5 is high. I like to see, Katie and I like to see our patients between 4.8 and 5.4. So anything over 5.5, you've got a problem. So that means that your average blood sugar is sitting up, in the hundreds on a daily basis. That's a problem for all the reasons that we just listed. The other thing is to look at leptin. Leptin is that fullness cue, because when we're under a lot of chronic inflammation, the brain isn't responding properly to those hunger fullness cues because of what Katie was saying about it being starving, but there being glucose in the blood. So it gets it's chronic inflammation and all of this stuff is happening. So testing your leptin, testing the ApoB and C-reactive protein are 2 other tests. Both of them just sort of generically are measures of chronic inflammation. And both of them are steered more towards cardiovascular health. But if both of those are elevated, you've got a problem. The other thing to look at is uric acid. So most people associate uric acid with like gout and kidney stones, but it's a compound produced by the body in the course of metabolism of fructose. So fructose, when you're eating fruit, is totally fine. And the reason is because God made sugar but because it tastes good, or the universe or whatever, but then put it in a form of fruit paired with fiber and minerals and nutrients. So all of that, it's like fiber is the antidote to sugar. So it's like when we eat an apple, it's very different than eating ultra processed food with high fructose corn syrup. And that's the issue with uric acid. So fructose is fine in fruit because it's paired with that fiber, but it's not when it comes in the form of high fructose corn syrup because it's free. So it's just pure fructose, and then it puts a huge stress on the liver. And it also doesn't raise blood sugar, so it can start triggering what we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and high uric acid. So again, if uric acid is elevated, then you've probably got a blood sugar issue. And like I said, ApoB and CRP. The other thing to look at is triglycerides. Katie and I like to see them under 75. And then, looking sort of deeper into cholesterol and how, are they big fluffy cholesterol molecules, or are they the small, dense ones? And so getting more detailed into your cholesterol levels. So again, just to summarize, it's your fasting insulin, fasting blood sugar, leptin, LEP as in Paul, TIN, ApoB, CRP, which is C-reactive protein, and uric acid. And if you look at those and your cholesterol levels and triglycerides, you'll get a real clear picture about where you're at.
The only thing that I would add to that list are liver enzymes. So ALT, and I would look at that too, just to see, again, for that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is most likely because of a blood sugar imbalance. So just look at how your liver enzymes are functioning too. But I would just add that to that list.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing about all of this, even if you get back your numbers, you're freaked out, the nice thing about our metabolic health is that it's almost never too late to do something about it. I would probably hope to say like 99% of the time something can be done just by taking all the interventions and things that you guys talk about. So even if it feels overwhelming, if it feels scary, like small things can happen today that can move the needle in the right direction. And I'm sure that you guys see that in your practice all the time.
That's the cool part about blood sugar regulation. And what we always coach our patients around is like, we can turn this around pretty quickly. There's a lot in the body that might take way longer, but insulin and blood sugar dysregulation, you can chase it, you can change how your blood sugar is responding by what you eat, which means that you've got minimum three opportunities a day to change that, and then if you're moving your body and how you're sleeping, like Tanda mentioned earlier, it's like, if we can change our insulin resistance by just getting one poor night's sleep, you better believe we could change it for the better by one night's sleep too. So it's like everything that you can do to move your health in the right direction is going to influence your blood sugar. So it's not too late for anybody. Honestly, if you do come back and you're like, oh my gosh, I really do have blood sugar dysregulation, there are way worse diagnoses out there. That's not a bad one. You can do a lot. There's a lot that we can do in the course of a day that, are free and lifestyle hacks, and you don't have to spend a ton of money at it. So that's not a bad one to get.
Katie, do you just want to fire back and forth like favorite hacks and see how many we can get?
Sure.
Okay, go. You go.
Okay. Apple cider vinegar before meals.
Yes. Move your muscles after meals, like 10 minutes of movement, because you're going to be using your muscles, and your muscles are huge consumers of glucose. So going for a 10-minute walk, or cleaning the house, or doing planks on your kitchen floor, or use your muscles after you eat.
Build more muscle. So strength training, just putting more muscle on. Muscle is, we can bypass that. Like the reason that moving your muscles after a meal is that we can bypass that. Remember, if insulin knocks on the door and it doesn't open, there's only one condition in the body that does not need insulin to move glucose into the cell. And that's when you're using your muscle. So if you're exercising. So also just building muscle means that your body is more metabolically active. There's almost like, I forget who it was that I was listening to a podcast, and he was using the analogy of a parking garage. So imagine like muscle cells are parking garages for glucose molecules. So the bigger the muscle, the more parking garages for glucose. So the more that we can shuttle that into. So strength training and putting on more muscle mass it's like the best hack at balancing blood sugar without actually having to do anything else. So
now I wonder if that also applies to stress. Like when the dogs ran away, Tanda, had you been like, okay, the dogs are good, I'm going to go work out, would that have helped in that situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yes. Another one is prioritizing protein. I cannot say that enough. Like be witness one personally, how it helped me with my sugar cravings, because I was a very, very bad vegetarian for a lot of years, and I craved sugar so badly. And then as soon as I started eating animals again and animal protein, my sugar cravings disappeared. So prioritizing protein is another one.
The order in which you eat your food. So eating fiber first. So if you have a plate and you've got, some broccoli, you've got a piece of steak, and you've got some potatoes, start with the broccoli, then eat the steak, then finish with the potatoes. You're going to be competing for absorption. So if you were to eat the potatoes first, that's going to quickly turn into glucose, going to go right into your bloodstream. If you eat the fiber first and then the protein, that's going to slow everything down. So you're not going to see that big spike. So you can still eat the foods that you like, just with some simple hacks. You can start to really manage your blood sugar without having to change your diet completely, or not eat the foods that you enjoy, like potatoes and French fries and pasta. You can still have those things, just be a little bit more mindful about the order in which you're eating them. That's going to make a big difference.
Prioritizing sleep too, because sleep is the master dial. It is my favorite biohack. Just do it. It's free. Sleep in the dark. The more hours before midnight, the better. Staying on a sleep schedule, so going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time, using things like lavender and Epsom salts at night, because lavender will help lower cortisol, and the magnesium will help you sleep. Sleep is another big one
Yeah. I mean, NK, you were right. Like moving your body after, if you are in a stressful situation, or you just had to have a really stressful conversation, or you're, doing your taxes and you're freaking out about it, go for a walk, try to mobilize that glucose into your muscle cells, just so that it's not hanging out. Like I said, it's an ancient response when we would actually have to use our muscles to survive. We don't necessarily have to use our muscles to survive taxes or tax season, but if just by going for a walk, or stand up, do some jumping jacks, whatever it takes, but you will actually mobilize that glucose into the cell, rather than it just hanging out in the blood.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say magnesium, because magnesium is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. And you guys have a great one.
Thanks for the shout out.
Yeah.
Also, along the lines of the order in which we eat our food, what about the quantity in which it is? So for example, typically when I look at somebody's plate, it's like 75% of the starch and then like maybe a little bit of some broccoli and maybe like a little bit of protein. But that's probably not the right way to go about it if we're trying to balance our blood sugar.
Yeah. So I like to tell people half your plate should be plants. Half your plate should be your kind of like veggie starter should be half of your plate. And then probably, a quarter of it could be your protein. And then, a quarter of it can be your carbohydrate. And then sticking to carbohydrates that are going to break down more slowly in the body. So we have complex carbohydrates. So things that are coming from the earth. It's like in its unadulterated form. If you've got sweet potatoes, if you have potatoes, if you have, root vegetables, beets, winter squashes, anything like that, the closer that it is to its whole food form, just like Tanda said with the fruit, that's going to be packaged with more fiber. It's going to slow down that starch being turned into glucose. So focusing on that, prioritizing that as your carbohydrate source. But if you are, out to a nice Italian restaurant, just making sure that you're having have a salad to start, and then, make sure that you're getting enough protein, that you're having, some, I don't know, chicken or animal protein, whatever it may be. If you're having something, say it's like a soup or it's a pasta dish and everything's kind of mixed in together, I just like to recommend people start with a veggie starter. So if there's a veggie option on the menu, or if you're cooking at home, have a salad to start, have a side of broccoli to start, have some roasted Brussels sprouts to start, have just, kind of a veggie starter before you dive into that, whether it's a casserole or a soup or a pasta dish where it's like hard to differentiate the carb from the protein. That's just a hack there too.
Yeah. And then if we're looking at supplements outside of magnesium, doing things like berberine, inositol, chromium, gymnema, there's some really great, again, like if somebody, is hearing this and they're like, yeah, I think I do have blood sugar dysregulation. They do go get their labs and they're like, oh my gosh, I do, it's on paper. There are, like Katie said, there's so many ways to turn it around and you can do it so fast. And there are a lot of supplements out there that do really, really well with helping people with blood sugar dysregulation.
And I would just say too, if you can get your hands on a continuous glucose monitor, with the caveat, if you do not have a history of an eating disorder or disordered eating, that can kind of make you, it can be a little bit crazy making between the ears. But if you feel like it would just be kind of raw data and a helpful guide in choosing different foods or how and when to move your body, I do recommend a continuous glucose monitor just to help you see, like, lift up the hood, look at your body in real time. Don't wait for those, that next level of, or that next round of labs. You can actually see what's happening in real time when you eat specific foods. And I may metabolize certain things different than Tanda or different than Yaz. Like, our bodies are individual. And so I may be able to, handle a little bit more fruit in my diet, whereas somebody else may not. So I think it just helps us kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together for you specifically, and just see what's happening in your body in real time. But again, like, use it for a tool. Don't become obsessive about it. It can make you a little bit weird. So
Totally. No, I know. I mean, even doing it for a month was good enough for me just to kind of understand trends and whatnot, but I love it. No, but Katie and Tanda, we love having you here. You're always just such a wealth of knowledge with like tactical tips for people to take away. And it's always so, so fun. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll share all your information in the show notes of where people can find you. You have incredible groups and all the content that you guys do. So we'll include that. But thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. We love
that.
Thank you, ladies.